Egbert Ethelred Brown has always been one of my favorite Unitarian figures. I invoked his spirit when I went before the Ministerial Credentialing Board. We invoked his spirit when we offered our blessing to Reverend Chris on his first Sunday with us. And I'm invoking his spirit again today. For those who don't know him, Reverend Brown was a Jamaican man who was raised as a traditional Christian and served as a lay minister in the AME Church, who later recognized that he wasn't Trinitarian. He started reading Unitarian writers and felt called to Unitarian mystery. Mystery. It's actually a really good name for what I do. Sorry, the word was ministry. He was told he could go to seminary in the States if he wanted to, but that Unitarian churches were white, and therefore there would be no church for him when he graduated. He persisted, and when none of our white churches would call him to their ministry, he started his own in Harlem. Reverend Brown was our first Black minister, and his Harlem Community Church was the first Black church that espoused Unitarian theology, although it wasn't originally part of the Unitarian Association. Ethelred was a friend of John Haynes Holmes. 2 years after Holmes moved the Church of the Messiah into the community church movement, Reverend Brown founded his church in the same spirit. Ethelred Brown was an intellectual and an activist. He fought for Jamaican independence as fiercely as he fought for racial and economic equity in the States. His political fire was fueled by his religious conviction. Responding to Karl Marx's reference to religion as the opiate of the people, Brown declared, "Religion is not an opiate, but a stimulant, an incentive to noble deeds and a sustaining power in the hour of crisis." Brown referred to Holmes as his only friend in his early ministry, and that friendship extended to an ongoing relationship between the churches. I've been looking to unearth more information about this relationship, but I haven't gotten too far yet. I've been wondering how that friendship expanded Holmes's desire for a multiracial church. Most churches were completely segregated. 40 years later, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. declared Sunday morning the most segregated time in America. And that was only more true in the 1910s and 20s. Until fairly recently, I think most people were comfortable in segregated churches. Church is culturally grounded, often more than theologically grounded. Families stay in the same churches for generations. It can feel like home. We've all had that feeling. And the people there feel like family, even when they're not related. It's only recently that we've been wondering if these racially segregated churches are helping us build the world we dream about, or are they a manifestation of our brokenness? Are they moving us toward wholeness, or are they a sign of our spiritual fragmentation? Horace Dudley was the first Black man to join what was then the Church of the Messiah. He felt compelled by the theology and was moved by the sermons. Reverend Holmes had been senior minister here for 2 years and thought Mr. Dudley's presence was a blessing and one he hoped to expand. He invited Mr. Dudley to be an usher. It seems in those days our ushers stood outside the doors rather than inside, which would have put him on the corner of 34th and Park, handing out programs and welcoming people to church. He joined in 1909. When invited into this role, he told his minister he didn't think it was the best idea, that his presence might keep white people from entering. Holmes responded that that was fine with him. Those weren't the white people we want here anyway, he said. As I understand the story, Horace Dudley was our head usher for many, many years. I was told that story when I asked some Black folks in the church why they thought community church was able to become multiracial. I mean, it's very unusual. That was the first story I was told. Then they went into more stories about the civil rights movement and the work Don Harrington did in the city around racial justice, and later work with the African National Congress in South Africa, which drew lots of people in. I've been curious about our history because I think this church is shifting white. And I've been wondering what changed. I don't have an answer, but one of the things I think about is the ways community church is a multiracial church and the ways we're a white church with Black members. In 2017, I went on sabbatical for 5 months and I spent time researching white, Black, and multiracial churches, both UU and otherwise. So here are a few things that I learned. White churches start on time and tend to either run an hour or less, or their day is divided up into very well-timed sections. But usually it's an hour or less. Black churches have fuzzy start times, with services starting when people are ready and running for as long as feels right, which is almost always more than an hour. People arrive to white churches and sit down and wait quietly. In both Black and multiracial churches, people arrive and talk to other people. During a white service, people stay in their seats. In both Black and multiracial churches, there's a lot of movement with people walking in and out over the course of the service. The Black church serves as an organizing engine. It's where people gather to do the work of justice and the work of their communities. Multiracial churches often have that also, but white people often see their church as one of many places they might engage this work rather than seeing the church as the central hub. Truly multiracial churches have examples and images of many cultures woven into church life, not as tokens, but as active, alive parts of how the group worships together. One of the things I learned that continues to break my heart, and which I've seen at community churches, that people of color in white churches report microaggressions of many types. White people take up a lot of time or space in a room. They confuse, I should say we confuse one person of color for another. We ask why we have to talk about race so much. White people have trouble seeing how whiteness is made manifest in the world. I'm really not blaming or pointing fingers. It's time for white people, myself included, to start seeing our own whiteness. I was taught growing up that white was standard. I didn't know that I had race. Race was for people of color. It was other. Likewise, I saw my own culture as normal and right. Starting on time is right. You have to start on time to keep things moving. Efficiency is the best way to handle anything. Other ways of doing things were therefore wrong. Different was wrong. So there's an important note here. My family became white. As Jews and Italians, we weren't white when we first got to this country. To become white, my ancestors let go of their own cultures to assimilate into this melting pot of a country. My great-grandmother on my father's side spoke Italian, but would yell at the grandchildren she raised that they were American and weren't allowed to speak anything but English at home. My mother wasn't taught the Yiddish her grandmother who raised her spoke, nor the Hebrew her uncles and cousins learned as part of their religious tradition. It wasn't just language. Everything that made my parents' families different was left behind so they could be white. What this effectively did was create a massive group of white people who are disconnected from our own roots and ancestry, and many smaller groups of Black people, Indigenous people, Latinx people, Asian and Pacific Islander people, each of whom have different histories and cultures that they're holding onto and working to keep alive. To ensure that all those stories and experiences aren't lost in an ever-expanding melting pot, it's incumbent on all of us to embrace a spirit of radical welcome and allow the varieties of culture to alter how we do things. And while this might seem like a massive task on a national scale, I really do think it's something that we can do here in our small church community. What new norms do we need for multiracial, multicultural community to thrive? That's the question I've been asking myself since I arrived last year. And this is the question I think that the eighth principle is asking us to. You might remember there's a move in the denomination to adopt an eighth principle. It reads, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote. That's kind of how they all start. But here's the meat of it, the journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our acts that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. Instead of just asking delegates to vote on this, the process has been to ask every individual church to wrestle with the principle itself, and then to adopt the principle as a guiding norm for the church before the vote comes to the delegates in 2022. So I'm not sure of the current number, but dozens of churches have done this. They've already voted to adopt. To move us in that direction, I invited the author of the principle and the leader of the movement, Paula Cole-Jones, to speak with us. Then I went to the board, tried to gather some leaders to help us move this forward at Community Church. And to be honest, I haven't been terribly successful. So I'm going to need a new strategy. It is possible I will ask us to approve the principle as a way to declare our intention rather than our reality. And really, that's what a lot of churches have done. It's possible I'll wait a few more months and try and get a multiracial team together and then let everyone become part of this experience, but do it maybe after the pandemic sort of shifts into this new normal before we dive into something so big. I get the feeling we're all sort of distracted with this transition. We may need more time. Whether we adopt the principle and then start the work or do the work and then adopt it later, I'm hoping that we can create a group of leaders who will ask us that critical question. What new norms do we need for multiracial, multicultural community to thrive? For someone like me, that question is exciting. I don't know what accountable, multiracial, beloved community will look like here, but I'm on the edge of my seat. I want to get started immediately, and I want partners who are equally as thrilled by the possibilities. I admit when it comes to racial justice, I often feel inadequate and powerless. I hear about the death of another Black or brown person at the hands of the police, and I feel powerless. I witness a microaggression, and I feel powerless. I'm accused of not moving fast enough or moving too fast, and I feel powerless and inadequate. But it's time for white people to stop being frozen by our powerlessness and instead to start talking about our power. And it's time for Community Church to live up to the promise of being a multiracial, multicultural church, a legacy we've inherited and need to protect. There's a lot of work, and it is ours to do. There's a new world, a new vision, a new hope for us. I'm asking you all to be part of it. As Reverend Brown told us, religion is not an opiate, but a stimulant. In his spirit and in the spirit of Horace Dudley and all the people who embodied beloved community, let's covenant to affirm our hope in the new world. May it be so.